Our Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they are thoroughly washing their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." Then Jesus called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Please be seated. Oh, Jesus is mad. I used to really not like being assigned to preach when the gospel text was Jesus mad about something. I love it now. In today's gospel, the Pharisees and the scribes, as we heard, observe Jesus' disciples eating with unwashed hands, and they are perturbed because their expectation is that Jesus' disciples would observe the same traditions that they observe about hand washing. Jesus responds to this question of ritual purification pretty severely if we don't have broader context. He leans into the precedents, the well-trodden precedents of the prophets in his quotation of Isaiah, saying, "These people dishonor me. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines." Jesus goes so far as to say, you abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. In isolation, this feels like a very disproportionate response to what is going on. But let's give it some context, because this is not Jesus' first dance with the Pharisees in the Gospel of Mark. To date, the Pharisees have chastised his disciples for not fasting when the Pharisees expected them to fast, later questioned the disciples for harvesting grain on the Sabbath. Jesus has sparked confrontation with the Pharisees around healing on the Sabbath. Fasting, Sabbath law, and hand-washing rites are all questions of ritual behavior, purification law, and the tradition of the elders. Including today's passage, the Pharisees have not yet once challenged Jesus to be more ethical or more moral. None of these are questions of moral law. They are only coming at him and his disciples about religious behaviors and norms. Meanwhile, what has Jesus been up to, Shortly before this confrontation today, he is feeding the 5,000. He is wandering the region, healing all the sick he comes across. He is fulfilling the ethical imperatives of his faith, engaging in what James calls in his letter being a doer of the word, engaging religion that is pure and undefiled before God, as in acts of caring for orphans and widows in their distress. And because Jesus comes in the prophets before him, such as Isaiah, he is angry when he sees the Pharisees having hearts that are far from God. Their worship for him is in vain. They've lost the plot here. Jesus finds that the Pharisees are unhealthfully preoccupied with the wrong focus. Their emphasis is on the wrong syllable, if you will, right? And not in a benign way. Many of you know that I'm a half-time campus minister for University of Oregon and LCC, and I will let you guess how many times I've heard the phrase, "I am spiritual but not religious." This is not just college students, this is all generations on the West Coast. More than you would think, right? Over 50% at this point identify as irreligious in Oregon. I will not pretend that everyone who is irreligious has the same reason as anyone else. But I know, because I am in relationship and conversation with many people for whom this is true, that they would hear today's gospel text and be vibing with Jesus, right? Jesus' frustration in this text is one I hear over and over still today, that religious people are pietistic gatekeepers and they're hypocritical at that, right? That Christian people care more about being religious than spiritually committed to the cruciform heart of Jesus' ministry. That we are not doers of the word, we are hearers and enforcers. And in fact, religious fanaticism can be an actively dangerous force in our world. And so for many spiritual people, there's a higher road to be taken by avoiding religion and religious people altogether. You may already be anticipating where the hitch lies here, because while Jesus is actively affronted by human precepts dressed up as God's intention for our lives, Jesus was, in fact, a religious man, right? The good and the crucial news for us as religious people is that we are invited by Jesus to consider the relationship between spirituality and religion intentionally and mindfully, so that our religious expressions serve our deepest spiritual values rather than replace them. At its base, the concept of religion points us to a range of social cultural systems, designated practices and behaviors, sacred texts, sanctified places. Religion is how we, you and I, collectively and over time, organize and create structure around our cruciform hearts, our core spiritual beliefs and values. In the case of Christianity, it's how people across time and around the globe have organized and created structures around what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Our designation and interpretation of biblical canon, our statements of faith, our ordination of pastors, our liturgical order for worship, our lectionary schedules, the colors that you see here, right? None of these rituals are unimportant to us. Religious rituals can be and often are deeply important. Ritual can be like a vocabulary, a whole language that we use to speak with one another. As with the Pharisees and their rituals of fasting and Sabbath observance and hand washing, none of this is about being morally correct. It is important because of what they represent about how we show reverence, devotion, how we make sense and structure to scaffold our shared spirituality. Religion is our realm, and spirituality is the realm of the Spirit, the realm of God. Is it possible that sometimes we forget and blur those two? Absolutely. Is it possible that sometimes we invert the significance of what we have created over against the less tangible realm of God? Sure. Let's make this visual and simple. In my office, I have a framed print from an artist I loved named Britt. They make these really fun, colorful paintings that examine different concepts that are really hard to talk about, but sometimes make more sense when we can see them. This particular print has two images on it. On the left, there's a little stick figure inside a thick, inky black closed circle, and it says, safe. And next to it, that same little stick figure is over here, but the wreath around it is living, vibrant vines, flowers, right? It's gorgeous. It reminds me of a garden. It reminds me of True Vine. And beneath that image, it says, safe enough. I love this painting as someone who's been a therapist because the visual storytelling about our vulnerability as tender, vulnerable humans is chef's kiss, right? We sometimes construct really impenetrable armor to feel safe in this world. Thick, fortress, Fort Knox, right? We lose a lot when we do that. Safe enough is a different thing, right? It's how do we create a self around our deepest tenderness that is alive, impermanent, vibrant maybe, but permeable, invites relationship, offers expression. And I also love this print because of how it makes me think about the relationship between spirituality and religion. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I think most of you have bulletins. Would you flip to the front, Colfer? Would you pull that out? For those of you who are joining us online, can we see this? Yeah? Okay. This heart here with a cross at the center, let's replace the stick figure in this imagining, right, with this heart. Consider this the cruciform heart of Christ, where the stick figure would be in Britt's painting. And let's say it's the shared spirituality of the Jesus-following community. This here is the body of Christ. It is the divine ordinance in our hearts that concerns us with the welfare of the vulnerable among us, with God's whole beautiful creation. It is our sacred longing. It is our deepest vocation. It is the Spirit stirring us into lives of service and love. Now, in your mind's eye, place that heart in a thick, inky black circle. Lock it up and put the word religious beneath. Let's consider this circle as one way that someone might view Christianity. Because as we've discussed, religion can be like this, impenetrable, imposing, strong, rigid. It completely obscures the heart at the center. For some, that's alluring. We love good strength. For others, it's repulsive. It's a fortress that's easier to protect against attack because it's reinforced stone. Not arguing with any of that. I myself find that it's a lot harder for the Spirit to blow through stone than a living garden. It is hard for us to both feel and respond to the breath and call of God in our lives when we are calcified for the sake of strength. We are moving and have been moving through an increasingly irreligious world, and we can respond by either doubling down on religion as indestructible, divinely ordained fortress, or we can dig into that rich soil of Christ's heart at the center and the center of our collective body and choose living vulnerability. Choose to be permeable. Choose to be vibrantly alive, increasingly diverse, unthreatened by lack of uniformity. So looking at that image again on your bulletin, let's take that black circle away for a minute and replace it with a wreath of beautiful, vining flowers as we hear these words from spiritual director Cindy Lee. She writes, "The spiritual life is always transforming. In this way, spirituality should reflect a multiplicity of layered human experiences of God. Our collective soul as a church will atrophy if one culture or tradition holds the power and control over what is taught and what is practiced in the church, our spiritual practices need to be reimagined as our communities become increasingly diverse. We long for a different kind of community, one that doesn't simply tell us what to believe and how to behave, but one that teaches us how to listen for the divine voice. We are looking for a spirituality not predefined from within, but from within which we can ask questions and learn from one another. In today's text, Jesus is protesting the atrophy of the soul. Jesus is protesting the sacrifice of true spiritual and ethical vocation at the hands of a calcified religious ritual fortified by false deification. But he does not condemn being human. He does not insinuate that religious practices are inherently problematic or evil. They are important because of what they represent to us about reverence and devotion and practice and wisdom and how we make sense of and structure our shared spirituality. When religion is more like Bouchard Gardens than Fort Knox, we find that our human precepts and practices are strong in a different way. They are coherent, they are resonant, they are vibrant, they are an extension of what gives life. And we as gardeners are attuned to the climate and the soil, and we are in dialogue with other gardeners. We are a spiritual people, make no mistake. And we are doers of the word as Christ who came before us. And we invite others into the gifts and the treasure that human rituals and practices can offer when they arise from collective listening for the divine voice amid an inheritance from the saints and elders who have gone before us. So as we continue in worship today, I would invite you to go so far as maybe even sketch something on the cover of your bulletin as we wonder together what something living and beautiful around the heart of Jesus looks like to us today. What is religion as living garden to you? We are spiritual and religious. We can be safe enough and open our hearts to the world. Amen? Let's sing together. The hymn of the day.